All right, I'll kick things off here and we'll let folks come in. Hopefully a few more folks to join. So yeah, here's the agenda. I want to do a quick overview of the talks that we saw at ArgoCon EU, which was a surprisingly, filled to the brim, very popular event. We'll do a few of our contributor shout outs as we like to do, and then talk a little bit about some of the 3.5 release roadmap that's in the works. And then the highlight of today will be presentation from Raymond from Forbes and Robert from synthesis.ai. Yeah, thanks you guys for coming and presenting today. So to kick things off, just want to call out ArgoCon EU talks are live on YouTube. Check these out. I think there's a good 10 workflows event talk specifically in here from end users, from primarily end users, some vendors like Pipekit. My team, myself, JP is on the call. We gave talks in partnership with a few other maintainers and end users like Bloomberg and Intuit, and then got to see some really cool end user presentations from folks at Rabobank was a good one. Yeah, Urquhart was another really solid one, and from a machine learning perspective, Wolt had a really interesting presentation about using Argo workflows and ArgoCD for ML orchestration. So yeah, highly recommend checking these out. I'll post specific links in here, but feel free to go through the playlist there. Yeah, quick shout out. We got some big news. Congrats, Terry, who's on the call, for being promoted to project lead. Long overdue. Yeah, round of applause. Standing ovation. So yeah, well deserved. And yeah, it's been a pleasure working with you on the project for the last couple of years now, and excited, yeah, for your new leadership position. I know you probably haven't prepared comments, so I won't hand the mic over quite yet. But yeah, I just wanted to call out that Terry's now a project lead for Argo workflows. We're really excited in the community on that front. And Bala is the other project lead, along with Alex Collins. And then there will be, I think, plans in effect to transition Alex Collins to approver. So yeah, exciting plans in the work. We have a couple other maintainer promotions. So it's from the Pipekit team, it's now a reviewer, and Julie was a reviewer, and she just got promoted to approver. So thank you both for all the awesome work and leadership in the community on the code base, especially. Yeah, really looking forward to working with you all going forward.
Thanks, Caelan.
Yeah, you're welcome. Glad you were able to hop on. And then last shout out for other folks we see in the Argo workflows and events communities. David, Ray, Alan, Robert. Yeah, awesome work, and great to have you now as formal members on the project.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely round of applause for y'all.
Happy to be here.
Few other shout outs. We had some other community members that got pretty active since our last community meeting, so I wanted to call that out. Or awesome work getting some fixes and even a few features in related to pod names, yeah, hooks and templating. Really appreciate that, and want folks to continue contributing on that front. Another shout out for Amit, getting a pretty helpful feature for templating host node name, which will help a lot with node selectors and using those in WorkflowTemplates. Nice work. Thank you for the contribution. And a last shout out to Max for throwing in some fixes like this. So I really appreciate all the work you're doing, and we'd love to keep working with you all to keep up these contributions, and don't hesitate to reach out to us if you're interested in membership on the project, or following the road down to reviewer and approver. With that, just some quick comments on the upcoming potential release for version 3.5 of Argo workflows. folks in the community have been chatting about this. The big things to call out are UI UX and quite a few fixes and features we have on master that are going to be slated for 3.5 release. If you're interested in contributing, UI UX is a great way to get going. So Terry put together this helpful GitHub project that organizes a lot of UI UX features and enhancements that we've seen upvoted. We'd love to get more folks involved on this, shipping some of these features ahead of releasing a version 3.5. So I see, Terry Isatho on here already. JM, great to see you. Really appreciate, helping out on this front. If you have questions, don't hesitate to post in the contributors, Argo contributors channel on Slack. We can support you in opening these PRs. And then, we have quite a few features that are on master but haven't been released, I believe. So we're mindful of this and looking to nail down a 3.5 release date, and we'll update the community once we have that. So those are the big updates on a 3.5 release roadmap. And I guess I'll pause there and see if anyone else would like to chime in or has any comments or questions. Right on. If you have feature requests, again, don't hesitate to speak up at community meetings, and we have contributors meetings every 2 weeks. So look on the Argo project calendar for those, and that's a good place to ask about when larger features might be on the roadmap. So with that, I'd love to hand it off to Ray at Forbes. If you're ready, I can hand over screen sharing to you, and feel free to take it away.
Will do. Thank you, Caelan.
Sure thing.
Yeah, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, but we see the Google Doc.
Yeah, okay, great. All right, let's go into slideshow mode. Hi, I'm Raymond Wong. I'm a senior architect at Forbes. If you don't know us, we are a global brand that are well known for our billionaires lists. So a little high level on our Argonauts journey. We started off with Jenkins like everyone else, and started to run into difficulty maintaining and scaling Jenkins. The main impetus is really the Docker deprecation. Jenkins running in Kubernetes with Docker and Docker was afraid that it'll not be available anymore, so started looking at new stacks. You can read more about it at this website down here. So this is our CI/CD pipeline. I used a Hello World container, but I can give you a good view of how we're doing things. So first we're doing a Git clone, and the reason why we're doing this first is because we take the outputs from Git clone and we use it in other places like building the image, Slack notifications, PR comments, what have you. So that is our entry point. Then you'll see that we're doing things in parallel, like building an image and doing a Slack notification and commenting on a PR. And you'll also notice that we're doing things in container sets. So we're trying to minimize the time spent on the entire pipeline. Then you'll see that we have a whole security section where we are either trying to figure out what language your repo is using, or if you pass in a tag, we'll use that tag. And then we will do various scanning, like for your code, your dependencies, your container. And then there's a whole exit handler that will notify you of the results. And if we so choose, we can start gating deployments. That's probably something that we'll turn on in the future. Moving on, we have our CD portion. So over here, we'll actually do a pull request into a app set. So we're using ArgoCD, and once the pull request is merged, then it will actually start doing the deployment. In the meantime, while the deployment is rolling out, we're going to figure out all the different applications that are being rolled out. And there's actually a sync and wait portion. So that will tell us when the deployment is healthy. And we have some other things that might happen in parallel, such as DNS, workload identity, deployment markers. And finally, once everything is done, we have an exit handler, which will, upon success, send out a Slack notification, or if there is a failure, it will gather all the failure messages and then send a Slack notification or a PR comment. And then there's also a PR comment if this was triggered through a pull request. So moving on, as a developer or a QA person, there are multiple ways that we can trigger a CI/CD workflow. One of the cool things that we developed in-house is a Slack app, which will take Slack commands. So over here, you see there is a /deploy, and then there's like a drop down for all the apps that we can deploy, and some parameters that you can pass in, like your branch, your environment. And then finally, it will trigger that, hey, I've done something. Another way that we trigger workflows is through GitHub. So one of the neat things that we've done is on a pull request, if I'm a developer and I'm working on different features, if I add this label a dev box, it will actually trigger a workflow to deploy a developer deployment onto Kubernetes where I can test my changes. Other neat things that we can do are watching for pushes to main or cutting releases. And all of this is done with a webhook to Argo events. Same thing with our Slack app, it's going to trigger to Argo events. We could go into Argo events at another time, but moving on, all those notifications that I was telling you about, this is how they might look. So on the left-hand side is saying that the build has started, and you'll notice that there is some Git commits mentioned in the links. And then over here, you have some security results. And then over here, you have the successful notification. On the right-hand side, you'll notice PR comments. We are using a legacy GitHub user, so that's why it says Jenkins Cloud, but it is all in Argo. And you have a notification that your dev box is being prepared and it is done with some useful links. So moving on, the interesting part, lots and lots of YAML. So I mentioned in Git Clone, we do have a lot of outputs which we are using in the future. One of them being a artifact. And you'll notice as an input artifact, we are using a Git artifact with secrets over here. You also notice that we have a lot of Vault annotations. So we are using HashiCorp Vault, and we are using Vault Injector to pull in secrets. So you'll see that over here. Moving on. basically, do a git authenticate, and then we might switch to a specific branch or revision. And then based off on some input Boolean flags, which are actually strings, we might inject some secrets like npm RCs or doing some Go mod vendoring. And then we're massaging our Git information and echoing them all out to outputs, which we will be using later. I will note that if you don't actually need to use all of these Git inputs or Git outputs, you could just simply do the Git artifact on your build stage. Moving on to our build image portion, you'll see that we actually define some defaults over here for Kaneko. We're using Kaneko because it does not need Docker sockets and it's secure. Then we have some more vault annotations and then an output for your image name. So in our container set here, we are going to generate some image data. So depending on some flags that we pass in, we will generate a image tag either using this random hash or a pass in image tag. And then we're going to output that into some text files that we'll use later. And then over here, you'll see a bunch of those Git outputs that we had before. We'll be using them as labels so that if we do a container inspect, you can see the attributes of the container from build time. Okay, moving on. We do pass in some build arguments as secrets, such as your GitHub personal access token, maybe some APM keys, depending on certain flags that are passed in. And then over here, we just do the Kaneko build from all of those arguments that we combine together. You'll notice that we do have a security context over here, and that is because Kaneko requires some elevated privileges. Noteworthy is running as root and adding some capabilities. And the reason for that is by default in our workflow template defaults, we are actually dropping privileges, dropping caps, making read-only root file system, running as a non-root user. So specifically, we are calling that out to elevate privileges. There's a great blog post from Alex Collins about securing your Argo workflows, which is a pretty good read. Moving on, this is our ArgoCD application set. So you'll notice we're using a list generator. So we have information about the environment, the image, who deployed, when, and then we're combining that into basically your cluster information. Moving on. So once we have the image created and we have the image output, so we know the image name, then we're going to do basically a bunch of YQ depending on if it's an existing deployment or if it is a new deployment. So we have all this complex YQ logic, which will basically insert into that app set, which I showed you previously. And then once we have that, we will do a pull request and a merge. So this is some more code. People can pause the screen later in the recording and watch it. So this is the Git diff of an existing deployment. So you'll see that it's actually just changing the random hash and the deployer and the deploy time. So this makes it pretty easy to revert back if there's some sort of change. You just go to the pull request and revert it, and now you're back into a good state. Moving on, so I did mention that once we do the pull request and it's merged, it there is a webhook which will trigger ArgoCD to start syncing automatically. However, we do specify a sync await, so we do know when the rollout has completed. And you can see this over here that we're trying to first determine all the applications which are affected. So in some cases, we have multiple deployments, multiple applications, because we are multi-regional, so we're highly available. So there are 2 applications, perhaps, one in, say, East and one, say, in West. So that's why you might have multiple targets to wait for the rollout to finish. And then finally, you see over here that we do the sync and wait, and then there's a specific timeout. Hopefully you finish your deployment before then, but the timeout is there to notify if there is something wrong with the deployment. For instance, you've pushed some bad code and your app is just crash looping and it never finishes the rollout. We want to know about it. And then when we finish our deployment, we get a nice hello Argo community. So I want to give some shout outs to my team, Nazar and Omar Kalush. They're great. And our intern at one point, Matt, he had contributed. So I could not have done this all by myself. So I just want to give props where props are deserved. And I will open it up for questions.
Nice. Thanks a lot, Ray.
Yep.
That was cool. I didn't catch the motivation for dropping Jenkins. Can you clarify that?
Sure. Do have a blog post about it here, but high level Jenkins kind of difficult to maintain. We did have a shared library which was collecting a bit of tech debt, and Jenkins, the control plane, doesn't really scale itself well in Kubernetes. You basically get a single pod. So if you're doing any sort of maintenance, you kind of have to restart the whole pod, and there's some downtime. Yeah, I mean, Jenkins is a good workhorse. It works well, but it can be difficult to manage. And also with the Docker deprecation that they had announced and is now GA in 1.24, we were worried that using the Kubernetes plugin for Jenkins, which relies on Docker and Docker, would not be available in the future. So there's a reliance upon the Docker socket, right? So if the Docker socket is gone, then a lot of this would not work. So that was the primary motivation in moving to a newer stack.
Cool. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I'll add a question for you, Ray. Yeah, what's next on, I guess, your to-do list with Argo at Forbes, either with CI/CD or other use cases? Like, yeah, what other needs or priorities do you have?
Great question. So I did mention we are using in our build image Kaneko. I'm actually evaluating BuildKit at this time, and what's cool about Argo WorkflowTemplates is I just swap out a container set or a template, and if my inputs don't change, it's pretty easy to just swap it in. And the main impetus behind that is noticing that Kaneko is a little bit slow, and I'm just trying to compare BuildKit versus Kaneko and see if it's worthwhile to switch over. Other things that are in our pipeline, Nazar, who I have mentioned earlier, We are doing some things with YTT for templating. And now we're kind of noticing there's some sprawl amongst our YTT templating across multiple repos, even though they are more or less the same. Some of them diverge slightly, and we want to be able to easily maintain that. So we're looking at something called Vendor, VENDIR, and he already has a pull request for that. I just need to find some time to review it, and we can test it out. So that's something interesting that we're working on. Perhaps not Argo specific, but interesting stuff.
Yeah, I sense another future talk about how you're using YTT. Yeah, with Argo. Pretty excited to hear about that.
There's a lot of topics I could talk about. Okay.
Yeah, any other questions?
Yeah.
I'll throw one more here for you, Ray. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead,
Oh, I
Robert.
was just gonna say, how long did this is a lot of work. This is really great, by the way. How long did this what we saw today take your team from start to finish? Just curious.
Oh gosh. There have been many iterations on this. Like I think we're almost like a year and a half into our Argo journey, but I mean a lot of it's, you know, figuring out like ArgoCD, had to bootstrap everything with ArgoCD. Coming out with the workflow templates, there's definitely a high overhead when you're first starting it out, but once you kind of chain everything together, it's not too bad. And we've been iterating, you know, we didn't first start out with container sets. We first figured it out everything as like as a step level, and then we're like, okay, maybe we can reconfigure this as a container set to get like some speed improvements here and there. I mean, we didn't always have a security scan portion. We just kind of figured that out later on and injected that. There have been several different frameworks for ArgoCD. Like we were using a app of apps pattern, so we didn't initially have all this YQ stuff. So I mean, things have been iterating and evolving, you know, over the past year and a half. So it's a constant progress. Okay. Any other questions, or I can just stop sharing and hand it off?
Yeah, you actually mentioned the container sets. I was going to ask you if you had any sort of speed improvement or cost savings numbers that you'd be able to share with the community around like going from stepwise templates to then using container sets for those steps that you mentioned on the previous slide.
Yeah, unfortunately, I did not capture that information, but we definitely did see some gains. Mostly, you know, what you're doing, if you're doing it stepwise, you're waiting for like your pod to be spun up, get scheduled. I mean, with this, you just have one pod with multiple containers, and hopefully, you know, you're building constantly, so your image cache is pretty good. So you don't have that wait time for the image or container to come up. I mean, there are things that you can do that maybe in the future we'll look at. Like I think in our cloud provider, there's something called like image streaming, which does some magic. And if you're using their container repository, it should just like start up instantaneously and then kind of bootstrap things later on. So that's interesting to look at.
Yeah, I think that was a feature that came out right on Google and AWS last year. The
Yeah.
container streaming. Okay.
Definitely something worth looking into. Just haven't had the cycles for that yet.
Cool. Does anybody else have questions? Well, yeah, thank you so much, Ray, for preparing all this and sharing all these details. We really appreciate it. Yeah,
I had a random question. Sorry.
go for it. Yeah, sure.
Is
James.
that the Dark Reader plugin for your browser? Because I'm not aware that. Okay.
That is.
Okay. Because that looks awesome. I was just curious.
Yeah, that's a good pro tip for dark mode
Yeah.
with Argo workflows. We should probably post that afterwards. Cool. Well, yeah, thanks, Ray. I guess next up, Robert is going to be presenting a potential feature that he's developed. So yeah, Robert, I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Yeah, appreciate it. And yeah, before I even get started, apologies in advance. I've been sick for the past week or so. So if I sound confused, I'll blame it on that. So yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to share this feature. It's something that we've been kind of chatting about for the past year or two and implementing, and I am excited to share what we've done so far in this meeting. I think before I dive into the slides here, I think the main goal here is just to get feedback on like how useful, like would this be broadly useful, or is this like a problem that just one or two people might have, but maybe not big enough that it's worth actually merging in to the main branch. So that's kind of the context. So my name's Robert. I'm a lead engineer at Synthesis AI. And basically what we do is that we generate synthetic training data for AI. And so our use case actually seems to be different than many of the other community members that I've talked with. So I'm curious if this particular feature is also kind of a niche thing or not. So the motivation here is that, so what we do is that we run workflows on behalf of our end users. So we could have 5, 10, 20, however many end users running workflows at the same time. And some of these templates use finite resources. So in our case, that might be a license, but there are other cases where you could imagine that, you know, you have this smaller set of resources that you need to share amongst users. And so the idea is that we want the users to have equal access to those resources instead of, you know, one user submitting 10,000 templates. And then the next user who's submitted 1 second later has to wait for all of those templates to go through before their templates run. That's kind of the high level. So just a visualization. My slides don't have a lot of visualization, so this is the extent of my artwork here. But you know, hopefully it makes sense. But like, suppose you have these two end users, Alice and Bob, and these gray circles here, excuse me, are the workflows. So you have this template that kind of dynamically or however spawns 4 sibling templates of the same type. And then Bob, for simplicity, let's say his workflow does the same thing. Now, these templates use a resource. So in our case, it's a license. So every template or every pod in our case that's running sorry, is claiming one of these licenses. So you have 8 total, but you only have 2 resources. So we want to give one of Alice's at any given time and one of Bob's until either Alice's or Bob's have completed, and then the other person will get both of them. I'll stop there. If that doesn't make sense to anybody, I can dive into a little more detail, but that's kind of the premise here. So yeah, like I mentioned, at Synthesis, we're running third-party software. In our case, this is rendering software. So these are some popular CG tools that are running on the pods. And when the pod spins up, it claims one of those licenses. When the pod spins down, it releases it. So we want to distribute how those licenses are distributed. There are other examples I think, but another one that came to mind as I was writing this was, suppose there's a smaller cluster with a finite number of nodes, and you want to, and so you want to distribute a particular instance class amongst your end users. Just another idea that came to mind. I'd be definitely curious to hear how this might be more broadly useful, what kind of cases this might apply to. So, like I mentioned, we've been working on this for quite a while. I actually, last fall, I opened up this second pull request, but our conversation on this has gone back even further by a couple months at least. I have a whole slideshow around the initial pitch, which kind of walked through my implementation at the time. It was kind of a first pass, so it wasn't ideal. I think it was a little more complicated than it could have been. It had more new concepts that I think people were interested in entertaining. So I did create a PR that worked. Got some feedback from the maintainer meetings. Bala was, amongst others, were very critical in helping me to kind of iterate on this so that it might be more appealing to the broader community. And as a result of those conversations, went back from the ground up again, re-implemented this a second time using a new approach. This time, this fell kind of under the category of or in the part of the code that was related to semaphores. Without going into too much detail, the way that those work is that they run on top of a queue. And, whenever a new lock is available, we basically pool the next resource that should receive that lock. Well, the new attempt, we create a new type of queue that can be swapped out with that default one. We decided in the end to call it rebalance queue, which basically what happens is when a lock is released from a currently running template, we quickly go and we sort the top few items so that we always maintain that kind of even distribution amongst the end users. So I went and I implemented that. I wrote, unit tests and integration tests. So we're quite confident that this works well. Yeah, I won't go through the whole PR. It's quite big, but it is there. 9992 if you want to check it out. Now I was weighing doing a live example. I get kind of nervous doing those. I feel like anytime something can go wrong, it does. So I wanted to just kind of share. And in the end, there's actually not a whole lot to see. You just see a bunch of pods running. So I wanted to step just a little bit deeper into the implementation by sharing kind of the user guide. This is documentation that I wrote in the proposals directory for this PR. And I think that in the end, we settled on a pretty nice and straightforward implementation. And this was a kind of a group effort. This was based on some feedback that I got in those earlier iterations. And the idea here is that currently you have config maps where you designate kind of a threshold for semaphores. In the current docs, there's an example that has template, and template is set to some value. So if you're running 5 of those templates, they're all going to run at the same time. If you're running 6, it's still going to run 5 until one of those finishes. And then finally that 6th one can begin. So we're building on top of that concept. But in this case, we're just adding one more property called basically template and then dash strategy is kind of where we landed. So just adding the dash strategy and then setting it to rebalanced. By default, if you don't add anything, if you don't change anything, you're still using that default queue. You're still using the default behavior. But if you set it to rebalanced, suddenly you're unlocking this kind of new underlying queue that'll open up this functionality. So that's the configuration that's involved. That's it. If we step down into the workflow itself, let's see what's happening here is that we have two steps. The first step is generating a list of numbers. That's all. And so you can see here that it's going to just spit out 15 numbers, and that's going to spawn 15 basically siblings as the next step using the with param tag or the with param property. And if you look in the acquire lock, we have all this kind of standard synchronization stuff, semaphore, config mapperf, where you're setting the key, and this key corresponds up here to the template. This is all existing functionality. But we add one more thing, the rebalance key. So this key, if two templates have the same key, they're considered to belong to the same user, or that basically they're considered to be equal when it comes to acquiring locks. So that's basically it. So if you were to spin up, say, two of these examples, and you were to pass different rebalance keys into, the first and the second, you would see that, we're sharing these 5 templates. And one of the users, one of the workflow instances would be able to run 3 templates at a time, and the other would be able to run 2. There's no guarantee on the ordering there. It's just going to be 3 and 2 until one of those completes, and then it would start to shift over all of the locks to the remaining workflow. So that's, didn't mean to do that. That's kind of in a nutshell, what we've been working on. It's pull request 9992. I'd really appreciate if any of this resonated, even just to go and give a thumbs up or leave a comment describing how this might be useful to your team or your project. And that's all I've got. Any feedback, any questions? Happy to help.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, that was impressively coherent given your disclaimers at the beginning.
Yeah, sorry about all the hacking away over here.
Hope you
It's
can
been a rough week. Thanks.
Sounds like it. Yeah, any questions from anyone? Yeah, I can say I've seen similar use cases where the cluster is getting overwhelmed with demands, and certain users are getting blocked out of jobs from executing, without this rebalance strategy that you mentioned. So it's a really elegant way of solving that use case. Interested to hear if anyone else ends up running into that. And like Robert said, please leave a comment on the PR, on the issue, or an upvote if you'd like to see it released at some point in the future. Cool. Well, yeah, if there's no other questions or comments, thanks everybody for coming. And I'll give a quick shout out again to 2 other ArgoCon EU speakers that hopped on, Yao Lin from Bloomberg and Michael Crenshaw from Intuit. Definitely check out the ArgoCon talks that are on YouTube. So go upvote those, share those, get them in the YouTube algorithm. But yeah, exciting to see all the awesome talks across CD and workflows there. Thanks, Ray and Robert, for presenting today, and we'll catch you next time.
Just want to briefly mention that North America is also coming up. The call for proposals is open. So if you have any use cases on Argo workflows, please submit a proposal to share with the broader community. And the deadline is gonna be like around like in a month or something.
That was KubeCon, right?
Yeah.
Yep, deadline on that, thank you, Terry, for mentioning, is June 18th. So yeah, I believe right around the next community meeting. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. If you have KubeCon or further talk ideas, we'd be happy to give feedback on them. If you'd like it and help set you up for a great submission. Anywhere we can support Argo workflows folks and users in the talks, we'd love to be there to support you. And yeah, hopefully we'll get more Argo representation in the next KubeCon. That will be happening in Chicago on November, I believe, 6th through 10th. And then ArgoCon, there will be an ArgoCon North America, so stay tuned for updates on that in the fall as well. But CFP process and details haven't yet been released. Cool. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.